What is going on, everybody? My name is Kneeckoh and welcome back to another Pokemon Scarlet and Violet VGC video. Today we are going to be talking about everything that is coming as far as returning Pokemon in Regulation E and what Pokemon you should actually be excited for going into the new regulation. There's a handful of Pokemon that I think will be very interesting. Not anything that's like crazy meta breaking or meta altering. However, I do think there are some Pokemon that'll be really fun to rotate onto a team and just try out in the format. Now, I will preface this video. These Pokemon have not been officially revealed. A lot of them have been in the trailers, but not everything in this video has been officially revealed. So if you are trying to remain spoiler-free of the returning Pokemon from the DLC, be sure to click away from this one. This one is not for you. But if you're here to learn about everything that could potentially have an effect on competitive, be sure to stick around. If this is your first time here on the channel, make sure you are subbed for more videos like this in the future. Let's get into it. Alrighty, now, like I said, not all of the Pokemon on this list are going to be absolutely meta defining, but they could be really fun, especially on a ladder team for throwing on and just having a good time with. And first and foremost, I have Ludicolo. I love this Pokemon. I used it in Sword and Shield, had a Sword and Shield team built around Ludicolo, running it with Kyogre. Really fun Pokemon because of its access to Swift Swim. Really solid Pokemon. I think with Terra, it could also be a really fun Pokemon. Now, as far as moves go, you're going to have a hard time with this thing if Scald does not make a return, okay? Because then you're relying on Hydro Pump as your main water damage, because the only other thing I think this thing gets is Surf in the current game. So that is something you do have to be aware of, is without Scald returning, this thing is kind of tough. You're looking at like a bundle situation. So hopefully, we saw it in the trailer, hopefully Scald makes its return, and a lot of Pokemon that are returning like Ludicolo will have access to this particular move, because otherwise it's not as solid as I'm hoping it's going to be. But as far as, you know, a Pokemon like this goes, really solid when you consider the fact that like something like Urshifu is so popular right now in the format. Having a Pokemon that can just eat a Rapid Strike Urshifu Surging Strike is really solid. Terra Water is really good here. Also, you could even roll Terra Grass with Energy Ball, Hydro Pump, or Scald, like I said, depending on if Scald makes its return. This is just a really fun Pokemon. I think it also gets access to Ice Beam, if I'm not mistaken. It does. So a lot of coverage here with Ludicolo, and it's just incredibly fast in the rain. Really fun Pokemon to sprinkle into a team to add some spice. Now, Ninetales is returning, giving us a Alolan Ninetales back. This is incredibly solid because it is much like Abomasnow, has access to Snow Warning, setting the snow, but it also just in the current game makes Alolan Ninetales that much better because of the defensive buff that you get from having snow on the field now as an ice type Pokemon. So all in all, Alolan Ninetales just kind of got a huge buff just from the weather effects, because it's already got pretty decent special defense stat, decent speed stat. HP and defense leave a bit to be desired, but because of the increased defense that you get from the snow, this Pokemon gets dramatically better. And it's just very solid. Again, another Pokemon that can hit into an Urshifu fairly effectively. There's a lot of dark types running around right now, so that's very effective as well. I think it's just going to be a really fun Pokemon, especially because our only snow setter previously was either Abomasnow or like a Snow Escape type of deal. So I really like the fact that Alolan Ninetales is making its return. Moving on to another weather setter, we have Politoed, and this one's really interesting, not in the fact that like Politoed's amazing by any means, but because of the fact that we're not reliant on exclusively using Pelipper to set rain anymore, and I think that's really solid. I still think Pelipper has its use cases simply because of the fact that it gets access to Tailwind, but having something like Politoed be able to come in and set the rain and be a fairly bulky Pokemon that can dish out decent special attack damage, I feel it's very solid. I mean, imagine this with like a Rocky Helm and rotating it into an Urshifu or something. Really solid, really fun Pokemon that I definitely could see sprinkled onto teams here and there. Next up is Vikavolt, and Vikavolt is an interesting one simply because of this absolutely wild special attack stat. It's just incredibly strong. With a 43 speed, this is going to be a Trick Room reliant Pokemon. But however, Trick Room is very popular right now. If you're looking at like Cresselia, Ursaluna teams, like Cresselia has really made a comeback where it didn't exactly have a foot on the ground in a Dynamax format. In Terrestrialization formats, Cresselia goes crazy. So having a team that could revolve around a Vikavolt is really, really exciting. It also has Levitate, so pairing it next to an Ursaluna isn't going to hurt it because you can still spam Earthquake with Ursaluna and not hit your Vikavolt for super effective damage. So I think that Vikavolt actually has a really unique niche here as being like that real sleeper pick in a Trick Room team, especially like a hard Trick Room team. I think it is something that could be very solid. Like Choice Specs Thunderbolt with Electric Terra is going to be absolutely insane because there's no reason not to Electric Terra because, again, you have Levitate. You don't have to worry about that super effective ground damage, which just makes this Pokemon really, really solid. Next up is Dusclops, and Dusclops was a fan favorite Trick Room setter in the Dynamax formats. Dusclops got a lot of use in those Sword and Shield formats. However, I don't know how good it's actually going to be in a format dominated by Fluttermane. That is the big thing with Dusclops. Eviolite Dusclops is super solid, and obviously, you know, Frisk isn't as good in an open team sheet format, so I don't think it's going to see a lot of use on like the actual competitive scene. However, on ladder, I still think there are some use cases for it, especially because it is a solid Trick Room setter with a lot of natural bulk. You have access to Will-O-Wisp, you have access to Pain Split, and you have access to Ally Switch, which is really, really fun to just get some cheeky stuff off. You can run Terra Dart to avoid that damage from Fluttermane. You could also run something just like Terra Normal to avoid ghost type damage altogether and not make yourself weak to Fairy. I think there is a lot of potential here for Dusclops to be a fun pick, not necessarily the best pick, especially with things like Cresselia doing similar things with Trick Room and Ally Switch, but I think Dusclops could be an interesting addition. Milotic is making its return. I think Milotic is actually really, really fun to see make its return because it's a really solid Pokemon as far as defensive categories go. You have competitive, you have Marvel Scale. There's a lot going on with this particular Pokemon. It's just very naturally bulky, which helps it out a lot, and it gets access to Recover. Run this with leftovers, and it's able to just kind of sit there and be a nuisance, especially we saw it in the trailer. I keep going back to this. We saw Milotic use Scald in the trailer, so Scald making a return is very, very big, and having access to this move is absolutely nuts. So Milotic is just good for that reason, for that chance to burn with also decent damage output, but also being that just annoying bulky Pokemon puts it in a really good scenario, especially when you consider you can Terra defensively and make your resistances just not a thing, will make your weaknesses not a thing in its Racialization format. I think that's very, very solid for a Pokemon like Milotic that's already so incredibly bulky. I think this Pokemon will definitely be a solid pick to throw on some teams. Next up, I have Dusknoir, and I don't know that Dusknoir will be that incredibly solid. It does have decent natural bulk and actually a half decent attack stat. So I think that on Trick Room teams, you might be able to mess around with Dusknoir again. With Frisk, it's not a great ability in open team sheet formats, but if you're playing on the ladder, there's definitely scenarios where Dusknoir could be really solid. And giving it a Life Orb or giving it a Choice Band, running it on a Trick Room team, it's got a fairly solid move pool with access to a lot of coverage moves. So giving it like a Choice Band and just throwing it out there and doing big damage could be fun. Again, I don't think it's that incredibly solid. However, just being a goofy fun pick for ladder is really fun here. Chandelure is a Pokemon that I'm a big fan of personally. I don't know how well it's going to do. Again, Fluttermane and Rapid Strike Urshifu are going to cause problems for this particular Pokemon, but I like it nonetheless. I ran a team with it, got the Master Ball and Sword and Shield with Chandelure as my Trick Room setter. I really, really enjoy Chandelure, and with this crazy special attack stat, I really hope to see it kind of find its way onto some teams and do some damage. It does also have access to Flash Fire, which is pretty solid. Change it into a Grass type Pokemon and put yourself in a really solid position against things that would normally do big damage to it, like Urshifu. I think that's a really fun pick. Maybe Focus Sash this thing. I don't think you're going to do a whole lot else with it because its defensive stats are pretty mediocre, but all in all, I think with the amount of damage it can do, it could be really solid. Especially think about pairing this with like a Torkoal or something. Getting your Sun up could be really fun for this particular Pokemon. Moving on, we have Ribombee, and Ribombee is interesting not because it's anything that crazy, but it does get access to Ally Switch, so I definitely see people building with this particular Pokemon. It's not like it's going to be anything crazy, but I definitely could see people building and doing stuff with it, kind of like they did with Vivillon. And when was it? That was the Players Cup, one of the Players Cups that we had in Scarlet and Violet. It's just like a weird pick that people aren't really sure what to expect from, so definitely thrown onto a team on the ladder, it can be a real problem, especially with access to Ally Switch and some other fun support moves. I think it's just going to be one of those goofy picks that you're not necessarily expecting when you hop on to the ladder. Next up, we have Weezing, and I think Weezing is actually going to be fairly solid considering, you know, a lot of the Pokemon running around right now. Looking at a lot of the photosynthesis and Quark Drive users, having the ability to shut down that ability altogether makes that null and void. So if they are running booster energy or something to that effect, that is going to be incredibly solid. I definitely see this being more of a threat, more of a common occurrence when we start seeing a lot of the Koraidon and Miraidon rotating in and activating those on, you know, just being on the team. I think that Weezing will actually see a lot of use there, but neutralizing gas is just so crazy for that ability. So I definitely think that Weezing will see a bit of play. Even Galarian Weezing also has access to neutralizing gas. Can be a really fun Pokemon, decent bulk here, and you're able to like Terra Water, Rocky Helm, do that kind of stuff with this Pokemon. Access to Will-O-Wisp, Heat Wave, Protected Sludge Bomb. Any poison type is going to have a nice time, especially with Fluttermane running around. So poison types are really solid just for that reason alone. So I definitely think that there is a case to be made for Weezing here. Next up is Crawdaunt. I think Crawdaunt is actually going to be really fun to mess around with, especially in the terrestrialization format where you can have adaptability and Terra Water. Definitely a really fun Pokemon to mess around with here. Choice Scarf this thing. For whatever reason, I had it in my head that this got Swift Swim. It unfortunately does not. I think it'd be even crazier with Swift Swim. But Choice Scarf it, you know, you have Aqua Jet, Liquidation, Night Slash, and Close Combat. Again, not the craziest Pokemon in the world, but definitely a fun Pokemon to mess around with nonetheless. Now, Snorlax, on the other hand, I do see being pretty solid going into this, especially when you have access to Belly Drum, Body Slam, Heavy Slam. You know, a lot of stuff that this Pokemon could do. It's notoriously good in the past. I think having access to Snorlax once again is going to be very, very fun. It's definitely going to be a Pokemon that pops up on teams. Moving on, we have Kommo-o, and I think Kommo-o actually has potential to be pretty solid in a terrestrialization format. It's not notoriously fantastic in the past, but it has had some niche uses, especially with access to Overcoat being a really solid Amoonguss counter, something you can just switch in and ignore the Spore is really solid, but also in a terrestrialization format where you can just kind of go out there and avoid your weaknesses. I have Terra Poison on this particular one just for the sake of talking about Fluttermane. I think that this Pokemon can actually be pretty solid. Does it get access to Heavy Slam? It doesn't, but it gets Iron Head, so that's kind of cool. So definitely a Pokemon to keep your eye out on with high base defense already. Iron Defense and Body Press is immediately what my brain went to, kind of assuming Goodra with more speed. So definitely a case there to be made, but it has a decent move pool as well, so you're able to have a lot of coverage options on this particular Pokemon, and I think the ability for it to just simply avoid a lot of those weaknesses in terrestrialization, I think it's going to make this Pokemon a little bit better than it has been previously. But that is the end of my list on like some of the more interesting Pokemon that are making their return in the Teal Mask. Obviously, we don't have the leaked list from the Indigo Disc quite yet, but that is another one that's going to be really solid to look into and talk about some of the returning Pokemon. I love the DLC concept. I really hope that in the 10th generation of Pokemon, we actually take a longer gap, have Scarlet and Violet a bit longer, and get additional DLC for Scarlet and Violet, and give them more time to kind of cook on the whatever Gen 10 is going to be, and then just have more time to add DLC, add more Pokemon, and just have more formats in Scarlet and Violet. I think it's a really solid foundation of a game, and I'd love to see what they could do with it if they took more time between generations with it. That's just my thought. Let me know in the comments below what Pokemon you are the most excited about returning in the Teal Mask, whether it be competitive or just because you love that Pokemon. Let me know all of that, but that is going to be it. If you enjoyed at any point, leave a like and sub for more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to check out the Discord. People over there hanging out, playing Pokemon all the time. And if you want to see anything else from me, check out any of the videos that you see here on screen. But until next time, peace.